Joining me now is best-selling author of such titles as The Madness of Crowds, The Strange Death of Europe and The War on the West, now in paperback, the great Douglas Murray. Douglas, let's start with President Joe Biden, who was in Ireland this week where he declared "I'm at home," and he then managed to mix up the All Blacks with the Black and Tans. One, as you know, is the New Zealand rugby team, and the other is an infamous British military unit that killed many Irish Republicans during the Irish War of Independence.
You see this tie I have with a shamrock on it? This was given to me by one of these guys right here. Was a hell of a rugby player, and they beat the hell out of the Black and Tans. Oh, God.
Yes, it was an infelicitous slip of the tongue by President Biden. It's an odd visit, this, because, of course, as you know, Rita, President Biden has said that he can't attend the coronation of King Charles in a few weeks' time. But he did turn up for the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which is the agreement that took place in 1988, which brought an end to the 30 years of troubles in Northern Ireland. And to a great extent, it was a sort of it seemed to be a sort of trip down memory lane, or a sort of happy place tour for President Biden, who, of course, loves to talk about his Irish heritage, but actually has had a rather unfortunate role in his career in terms of peace in Northern Ireland. And indeed, the Democratic Party, which he is the head of, has had a terrible reputation in brokering the peace deal. Even now, senior Democrats like Chuck Schumer call for instance, the reunification of Ireland, as they say. They say the unification of Ireland, which is like a British MP turning up in America and calling for Texas to secede from the Union. So actually, President Biden's trip, it was obviously pleasant for him. It was obviously pleasant for his family members who all went along with him. But it wasn't a very pleasant thing to watch, and it didn't really do any diplomatic good. Joe Biden had no involvement in the Good Friday Agreement, and actually in the 1980s was a pretty awful force for the protection of people who are on the run from Britain, not least for terrorist activities. So I would have liked to have heard a little bit more from President Biden about what he'd got wrong in his own past about Northern Ireland and about the conflict. But instead, we got treated to this sort of typical Biden-esque, let's say, sort of slightly warped trip down memory lane.
It was bizarre on a number of fronts. I mean, the gaffes we're used to, but you're right, the diplomatic message it sends, certainly some in Britain are looking at this and interpreting this as the US and the White House showing contempt for Great Britain. And as you said, why not turn up to the King's coronation? He's already declared he's not going to be there. Now, you wrote a really important piece this week for the UK Telegraph on Xi Jinping's plot to dominate the world, and that seems to be succeeding quietly, whilst the West is preoccupied with trivial nonsense, and America's more divided than ever, and China advances.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the points I wanted to bring across, and I've been trying to bring across for some time now, is it's very striking that if you look at the rivals and competitors, indeed enemies of America and the West in the 21st century, they all think in incredibly long cycles of history. You know, we think in our democracies, in Australia and Britain and America, in sort of 2-year cycles, 4 years, 5 years seems an infinitely long time in our politics. But of course, the Chinese, like other competitors and rivals, they think in very long terms. And, you know, whilst we have all of the froth of politics in our own countries and all of the idiocies that go along all the time, China is very busily getting on with the business of trying to become the dominant global power in the 21st century. We saw it recently, and I mentioned in that piece, with the China-Brazil deal, which very interestingly, various people commented on, but the most interesting thing about it was that it circumvented the use of the US dollar. That is a very telling sign, Rita, that both Brazil and China were able to do a deal of this size and not have any involvement with the US dollar. Is a sign of a serious tectonic shift happening underneath us in our era. And I just wish that more politicians in all of our countries were aware of that shift and aware of what it meant and actually got down to the serious business of trying to make sure that we effectively are able to compete with this power which is so desperate to compete with and overtake the world's democracies.
And it is doing such an incredible job. You mentioned some of their economic might there, but they've just recently brokered peace deals between the great Sunni and Shia powers, Saudi Arabia and Iran, something that has shocked many Middle East watchers and has all sorts of consequences as well. So, yeah, China is just quietly doing what it wants, and the West is turning on itself.